Thomas Jefferson is remembered as the author of liberty, yet his legacy is filled with unresolved tension. He wrote that all men are created equal while owning enslaved people. He championed limited government but expanded executive power when it suited national interest. He warned against concentrated authority, yet governed through quiet, calculated influence. Was Jefferson a principled defender of freedom or a skilled politician adapting ideals to circumstance? And what does his life reveal about the limits of revolutionary ideals in practice? In this video, we're going to examine this story in detail and uncover what history usually leaves out. Thomas Jefferson entered public life at a moment when words carried extraordinary power. The American colonies were not only rebelling militarily, but redefining political legitimacy itself. Jefferson's talent was language. When he drafted the Declaration of Independence, he gave philosophical clarity to grievances that had been building for years. Drawing from Enlightenment thinkers, he framed liberty as a natural right rather than a privilege granted by rulers. This rhetorical shift mattered. It transformed a colonial rebellion into a universal claim about human freedom, one that would echo far beyond the immediate conflict with Britain. Yet Jefferson's language was more radical than the political reality he inhabited. The Declaration condemned tyranny while carefully avoiding direct challenges to slavery as an institution within the colonies. Early drafts included language criticizing the slave trade, but these passages were removed to preserve unity among the colonies. This compromise is often explained as political necessity, but it introduces a central contradiction. Jefferson understood the moral implications of slavery, yet accepted its continuation when it conflicted with broader revolutionary goals. Jefferson's personal relationship with slavery complicates matters further. He owned hundreds of enslaved people over his lifetime and relied economically on plantation labor. At the same time, he described slavery as a moral depravity and a threat to Republican virtue. In private correspondence, he expressed fear that slavery would bring divine judgment upon the nation. Some historians argue that Jefferson was trapped by the economic and social structures of his time. Others note that many contemporaries took greater risks to challenge slavery directly, suggesting that Jefferson's restraint reflected choice as much as constraint. This tension between ideals and action appears repeatedly throughout Jefferson's career. As a political thinker, he advocated for limited federal authority, warning that centralized power would erode liberty. He envisioned a republic of independent farmers, believing that economic independence was essential for political freedom. Yet when Jefferson became president, he confronted a world that did not conform neatly to theory. The Louisiana Purchase stands as a defining example. The acquisition doubled the size of the United States and secured its western future, but it posed a constitutional dilemma. Jefferson doubted whether the Constitution granted him authority to acquire foreign territory. He even considered a constitutional amendment to legitimize the purchase. Ultimately, he proceeded without one, citing national interest and strategic necessity. Official explanations present this as pragmatic leadership, but it reveals Jefferson's willingness to stretch constitutional interpretation when circumstances demanded. What complicates this narrative is Jefferson's awareness of the contradiction. He did not deny that the purchase conflicted with his strict interpretation of the Constitution. Instead, he accepted the inconsistency, believing that the long-term survival of the Republic justified short-term departures from principle. This raises an important question. Was Jefferson a hypocrite or a realist navigating the tension between ideals and governance? Jefferson's approach to power was subtle. Unlike more confrontational figures, he preferred influence behind the scenes. As Secretary of State, Vice President, and later President, he built networks of allies, shaped public opinion through sympathetic newspapers, and framed political opposition as threats to Republican values. His rivalry with Alexander Hamilton illustrates this method. Jefferson portrayed Hamilton's financial system as monarchist in spirit, arguing assuming that it favored elites and endangered liberty. Yet Jefferson's own political maneuvering contributed to the emergence of organized parties, a development he publicly criticized but privately encouraged. Foreign policy further exposes Jefferson's contradictions. He distrusted standing armies and foreign entanglements, yet faced ongoing conflict with European powers. His response to British and French interference in American trade was the Embargo Act, a sweeping assertion of federal authority that restricted commerce nationwide. Intended as a peaceful alternative to war, the embargo damaged the American economy and proved difficult to enforce. Critics argued that it contradicted Jefferson's commitment to limited government and individual freedom. Some historians interpret the embargo as evidence of Jefferson's flawed judgment, others as an example of ideological rigidity applied to complex global realities. Jefferson believed economic pressure could replace military force, but underestimated the resilience of European powers and the domestic costs of such policies. The episode highlights a recurring pattern. Jefferson's ideas were ambitious and morally driven, but their application often revealed unintended consequences. Jefferson's legacy is also shaped by what he chose not to do. Despite his belief that slavery endangered the Republic, he did not free most of the people he enslaved, nor did he push aggressively for national abolition while in office. He feared that sudden emancipation would lead to violence and social collapse. This cautious approach has been interpreted both as prudence and as moral failure. The question remains whether leadership requires acting within perceived limits or challenging those limits despite the risks. At the same time, Jefferson's influence on education, religious freedom, and intellectual life was profound. His authorship of the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom established a principle that belief should not be coerced by the state. He supported public education as essential to an informed citizenry, believing that liberty could not survive without knowledge. These contributions reflect a consistent belief in human potential and self-government, even as his actions fell short of those ideals. Jefferson's presidency ended quietly, but debates over his legacy intensified with time. Later generations embraced his words while questioning his life. Abolitionists cited the Declaration to condemn slavery. Critics pointed to Jefferson's personal conduct as evidence of foundational hypocrisy. Both interpretations draw from the same record, highlighting how Jefferson's contradictions made his legacy adaptable to competing causes. Rather than resolving these tensions, Jefferson seemed to accept them as unavoidable. He understood that revolutions do not erase existing structures overnight. His vision of freedom was expansive in theory, but incremental in practice. Whether this reflects wisdom or failure depends largely on how one interprets the responsibilities of leadership in a deeply divided society. Thomas Jefferson was neither a simple champion of freedom nor merely a flawed politician hiding behind eloquent words. He was a product of his time and an active shaper of it, advancing revolutionary ideas while constrained by economic realities, social hierarchies, and political risk. His life illustrates how ideals gain power through compromise, but also how compromise can dilute those ideals. The questions raised by Jefferson's career mirror those at the heart of the American experiment itself. Can a nation founded on universal principles tolerate their unequal application? Can leaders preserve ideals while navigating imperfect realities? Jefferson left no clear answers, only a record filled with ambition, contradiction, and unresolved tension, inviting each generation to decide whether his legacy represents the promise of freedom, the limits of political courage, or both at once.